All right, hopefully this is working now and you can see both me and the computer screen itself. This is the first attempt of podcasting using this software. So here we go. If you all are hearing this, which hopefully you all are, I apologize for having to cancel class today. The mother of my daughter, who was supposed to pick her up from school today, got in a car crash on her way to pick her up. And there was no one going to make it there to get my daughter from school at all because her car was not operational. And so I had to leave mid-class, my 5 o'clock class, and head out to make sure my daughter was not left at school alone after ASP. So I apologize sincerely for this. I'm going to give the lecture now via video that I gave today in class, or would have given today in class. I also have all your papers graded and ready to pass back. I'll enter the grades online so you can see them, but they have comments and the full markup. And I'll be available tomorrow between 11 and noon in my office. If people want to come by and pick up their papers or come by and talk about anything, you're welcome to do so. I apologize again for not having class. It's my sincere hope to always have class, and that didn't have it this time. All right, so that said, what the content was for the discussions for this week, or the lecture this week, is about debate argument structure, or what's called debate argument shells in a way, which are the outlines and the terminology that's used to deal with debate, as particularly policy debate. And because we're going to be talking about public policy in this class, these issues will be very germane, and these terms will be very germane to our discussion the rest of the semester. And so it's important to know about what these key terms and these key structures are so we can understand the argumentation of public policy in a unified and hopefully more thorough way. So let me pull up here, content. It should be under week 6, of course, which is today. We're already there. So intro to the stock issues of the file. It's a PDF I typed up. You can download if you'd like, and certainly have it to refer to as kind of a cheat sheet. It's opening up right now. And dun, 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 dun. All right. So basically, to know what the arguments to make in the stock issues. So stock issues, stock is being used here in the same way that it's used to refer to like the stock stereo in your car, right? It's what comes standard. So all public policy has to have these standard items, these standard forms of argumentation and these standard elements in order to be considered feasible or even properly debatable in the real world, right? And so this pattern of analysis was developed by John Dewey, who was a big proponent of education in the United States, equality of education, as well as education being the springboard to increased economic productivity, i.e. if you want to make more money, if you want to get yourself out of poverty or get a community or a family out of poverty, the best way to do it is through the vehicle of education. It also builds a better society because more educated individuals make better decisions for the social group and thus the nation as a whole. So let's assume for the example here, as it says on the sheet, that you're trying to convince a town hall meeting that the city ought to renovate or build more playgrounds. So the policy topic we're on then for this example is playground building, and you're convincing the relevant acting legislative body, the school board or the city town hall board or city planning board of your advocacy for your policy. So you have to have a detailed plan of action, like what playgrounds do you rebuild, where to buy more land, and so on. Would this be enough to convince the people if you just have a plan that you're going to buy this land and have these playgrounds to rebuild, and why? No, you need a plan of action, but you also need to provide a reason for adopting the plan. Why would you want to adopt the plan? Why is it better than the status quo, i.e. what's going on right now? What's wrong about what's going on right now? Why can't we just keep it the way it is? People don't like spending money, especially taxpayer money. There's not a good reason to require them to do so, right? So you would have arguments prepared beforehand. For example, the old playgrounds are unusable. There are too many children in the city and not enough facilities. Kids end up having to play in abandoned quarries. Even where facilities exist, the grounds and equipment are in poor repair. And there have been 5 major injuries to children in the last 2 years from collapsing swing sets. At the same time, you have to justify the city's taking action. Point out that no private citizen or company will underwrite the cost of repair, but the city has thousands of dollars of funds earmarked for park improvement and playground improvement, right? So how does this apply to debate? How is these city playgrounds and these rebuilding of swing sets relevant to policy debate? Well, if you'll recall, the affirmative team, which means the affirmative or the policy proposing side, needs to justify changing the status quo. The first goal of the speech is to present a specific plan, your public policy plan, and then a list of reasons for why you want to make the plan happen, which is called the case. So again, the plan is the bare bones, like exactly articulated, like as in a bill or a resolution in Congress, what's going to happen. So it would be like this government will pass funding to build a new student playground at these 4 sites using this amount of money. This will be the contracting bid that we put out, and this will happen between this time frame, right? So the affirmative has to present a prima facie case. The prima facie, pronounced that way with the phonetics there, is Latin for first glance or on face value, right? It means the arguments that you present as the policy proposal, as the policy proposer, are sufficient in and of themselves to persuade a person to pursue the plan, right? It means you give legitimate reasons for why the policy plan you're proposing is better than the status quo. And these all have to be fulfilled and presented if the policy is going to be considered debatable or even brought to the forum as a purpose of for the purpose of enacting it, right? So this doesn't mean the policy is going to be passed automatically, or even if it's a good policy, simply because it has these 4 elements. What it means, however, is that in order to have a passable policy or to move on to the debate phase, it has to have these elements present, otherwise nobody will even consider it in real life. So what are the common components of a prima facie case? There are stock issues, again, like the stock radio system in your car, right? Every policy has these 4 basic issues in some variety or flavor. So you can think of them as answers to questions, as questions to which your plan and your case must provide an answer to, and anyone opposed to it will say, will negate or say no to. There's many ways of posing the question, but here's some examples. This is how you generate a policy for yourself when you end up choosing your topic for the final paper and the build up to that. Is there a significant need for a change? Is there a great harm in the status quo, what's going on right now, or is there a great advantage which can be obtained by modifying the present way of doing things? What mechanisms of the status quo cause the problem to remain? Is the harm an intrinsic part of the present system, and can only the plan or proposal you do gain advantages over the status quo? Will the proposal ease the problem effectively? Will you actually solve the problems you're talking about? And will it avoid unpleasant side effects? For example, if you were to build playgrounds or school equipment out of depleted uranium that the military has rejected, right? It's probably free, you could get donated, and people could build it, and it lasts forever. It's very sturdy stuff, very hard stuff is depleted uranium. However, the side effect that it's radioactive would be a negative impact that would undermine and outstrip the benefit that would be gained from building new swing sets for children because they'd be radioactively toxic, right? All right, so the first stock issue is harm or need, which answers the first question here. If my mouse would work. Do-do-do, do-do-do. Come on, mouse. Anyways, the first stock issue is harm or need. The second question would give you inherency or uniqueness. The third is solvency, and the fourth is disadvantages. So basically, what the harm or the need is saying the status quo, i.e. what's going on right now, has negative effects and negative things that are happening to individuals. Harm is being caused to people in the community or the global world that can be prevented if we enact the plan. So the harm, for example, has to be, in the example we gave, is that there's kids playing in quarries instead of playing on swing sets, and there's swing sets collapsing that are hurting children every year. There's something negative happening that is affecting individuals in the community that we can have a policy which will prevent from happening in the future, right? The inherency is what's stopping this from being corrected automatically in the system. Why is this an inherent problem to the status quo? Why is this inherent to what's going on right now in the real world? And so if you don't have inherency, an opposing team or somebody opposing your policy can say, that's going to happen anyway. Like, don't worry about it. Like, somebody's going to rebuild playgrounds when they need to be rebuilt. Like, there's a system already in place to correct this. We don't need your plan. We don't need your policy, right? And the next one is, and that's why uniquely you need the policy. That's why it's called uniqueness at times. Like, uniquely your policy can solve the problem, which leads us to the third part, which is solvency. The solvency is, does the plan that you propose actually solve for the harms you put out? So if you, for example, have harms that kids are falling in quarries and swing sets are collapsing because of the old used playground equipment, then if your plan doesn't directly address those issues and solve for those, meaning that you address collapsing swing sets, have a plan and a reason to deal with those, and specific mention of that in your plan, as well as specific mention of how more playgrounds are going to keep kids out of playing in the rock quarries and being eaten by dinosaurs or whatever, if you don't have those mentioned in your plan and your solvency, then you can't solve for the harms, and why the hell would we pass your plan? Right? The fourth, which is disadvantages or advantages, right, are, do you avoid building swing sets out of nuclear waste or depleted uranium? Or are you going to build them out of wood? Okay, cool. If your plan is to build them out of non-fissile nuclear materials, that's great. If your plan is to save funding and cost by building out of depleted uranium, it's going to be an issue, right? Or if for some reason they would have another negative issue, like you're going to take all the money for school lunches and build the playgrounds with that money instead of the normal playground money. That would cause disadvantages like malnourishment and deprivation of food for kids, right? So does the plan entail any extra bad crap that's going to happen because you pass it is a disadvantage. An advantage on the flip side is like a bonus you get. It's like, okay, so we're going to pass a plan. It's going to solve all the problems we list in the harm. It's going to solve everything there. And we're going to get an extra. We're going to get a bonus, something on top of that. So for example, with this example, if we wanted to say that not only will building the playgrounds or rebuilding the playgrounds prevent the 5 kids a year from being hurt by collapsing swing sets and keep kids out of the quarries, it will also be a community rallying point that will build morale and keep kids in education longer because the community will have a place to go that's safe and is well kept, and that the kids will want to interact with each other and have team sports and community and barbecues and whatnot. And that would be a benefit to the community that's not present in the status quo. That happens not because the policy is not trying to legislate these community barbecues, but they'll happen as a side effect of the fact that we pass the case and have the plan enacted as we suggest, right? So advantages are bonus stuff, disadvantages are negative side effects of the plan that you're supposed to abate as the affirmative or the proposal team and drive home as the negative team. So like I said, okay. The first stock issue is harm or need, like I said, inherency, uniqueness, solvency, and disadvantages. Why aren't disadvantages a stock part of the prima facie case? Like, why doesn't the affirmative team or the proposal team have to bring up disadvantages or side effects right off the bat? Because in debate or in policy in general, we know that every plan has a tiny amount of risk. Like, every action in the world has an inherent amount of risk with it, right? We trust that the affirmative team is not going to spend enough time on disadvantages to actually preempt every possible outcome. So of course, like everything could eventually somehow trigger like a war with Chinese steel imports, and that would make China give nuclear weapons or more supply and missiles to North Korea, which would then launch on Russia, which would then launch on. So you can build anything causally towards like the slippery slope of global thermonuclear war. And so we don't expect the affirmative team or the proposal team to cover every possible disadvantage or side effect that could happen from the case, because anything could technically happen, right? So we expect, however, that they're trying to gain benefits in the plan. From the plan, and that they're not trying to undermine the world or cause nuclear war as a basis for that. If the negative can show, or the opposition can show that there in fact is a risk of global thermonuclear war with the plan, then the affirmative can come back and address that later on in the debate. But the affirmative team doesn't have to come out by saying, oh, we know that this is not going to allow for like increased poverty or global thermonuclear war or the risk of global warming or anything else you could think of as a bad side effect that could happen from any policy being passed, right? You don't have the duty to anticipate and answer all possible side effects because you can't possibly fulfill that burden of proof, and you have a very uninteresting case if you did. The other thing that's interesting too is like, so because of the fact that you have a plan which is trying to change the status quo or change the way things are right now, right? If you don't have solvency, if your plan does not solve the harms you give, then there's no reason to pass it. So if you actually provide a plan that doesn't solve for the harms at all, then you're already losing the debate. You already are out of the policy realm, because why the hell would anybody pass something that doesn't actually address what you're trying to address? Explain the need stock issue, right? To meet the need issue, the affirmative has to prove a significant amount of suffering going on due to the present policy. So we can take 2 approaches to prove the sufficient amount of harm is being done, the quantitative or qualitative harm. So quantitative harm is a bunch of people are being hurt a little bit. Qualitative is a few amount of people are being hurt a ton. So a good example of this is, say, let's talk about like non-violent drug offenders in prison, right? A lot of people are being sentenced because of mandatory minimum sentences for non-violent drug offenses in prison, right? And so you'd say because of the far-reaching scope of this, even though the sentences aren't incredibly long, but they are devastating to individuals, and it's happening so much that creates a quantitative harm rather, that we have to address because it's endemic in the system and causing mass amounts of harm. The same thing on the flip side, a qualitatively big harm would be something that happens to a few people but is deeply, deeply troubling. So victims of violent crime, for example, victims of police shootings, for example. It doesn't happen to like 1 in 4 Americans or 1 in 4 people in the world. However, when it does, it's a horrible problem and it's almost irreparable. And so one is too many. And one instance of this is too many instances of this. So it has to be addressed, even though there's not 3 million per year of the instance that happens, right? Oh, so remember, this is a caveat point. The need analysis, the analysis of the needs and the harms in the status quo, is valid as an advantage instead of a harm. For example, if you demonstrate that cutting pornography would cut assaults, resulting in a savage of thousands of hours of police work and millions of dollars in court and prison costs, the quantitative advantage is just as legitimate as a quantitative harm approach. So basically, if you can prove that the plan that you're going to implement causes a bunch of other good stuff to happen qualitatively or quantitatively, either way, you can claim that as an advantage to plan, like bonus to getting, for example, decriminalizing marijuana, right? In addition to the people and the nonviolent drug offenders being out of prison and not being convicted and having their personal harms, the strain on police forces that will be lessened because of all the time and the time prosecutors spend prosecuting drug crimes on that low level would be alleviated as well as the prison burden. The burden on the prison system would be significantly reduced. So you can claim all those as an advantage to legalizing marijuana when you're actually addressing the harm of people being punished unjustly or mandatory minimum sentences for possession charges, right? All right. Inherency is one of the hardest stock issues. It's the next one to explain. The crux of inherency is the nature of cause and effect. You want to demonstrate there are features in the status quo which cause the problems discussed in the harms, the needs. Providing this causal link means that the harms can't be cured except by reforming the status quo. Like, it's not going to fix itself. The system is broke and it ain't going to fix it by itself, right? There's 4 basic kinds of inherency you can see out there. You only need to use one per case, one per policy plan or proposal. Structural inherency is the strongest type of inherency to go with. It suggests that a law or rule or fact of life is causing the harm. For example, you can give an argument that people who do not do a good education have low productivity, thus they earn low wages and thus are condemned to poverty. The causal link of poor education to low income is based upon economic facts. Similarly, the government rule that people who have given up looking for jobs are not counted as unemployed means that the unemployment figures underestimate the number of people in need of work. A law demonstrates structural inherency, right? So there's something that the way the numbers are counted in the second example that means that the unemployment is much larger than is purported. In the first example, right, education leads to poverty, lack of education leads to lack of poverty, so you have to change education levels to change poverty levels, right? Gap inherency is weaker than structural inherency. It's the next kind. And notice the present system has identified a problem, is trying to fix it, but the steps fall short of curing the harms. There's a gap between the solution now in existence and the harm that needs to be cured. So federal welfare payments are designed to relieve poverty, for example, but the money a family receives from welfare is too little to raise it above the poverty line. So there's a gap between solving the poverty crisis and the amount of money government's putting into it, right? It's weaker than structural inherency because it shows the status quo is already addressing the harm. It's just not doing it all the way or doing as good a job as possible to fix it. And that's provides openings for the negative to attack. Attitudinal inherency is causing that, it claims that the problem is not going to be fixed because of people's beliefs, feelings, or opinions. For example, like divergent impact theory and racial prejudice is an example of attitudinal inherency. Like there's a structural problem with systems of discrimination in the United States, let's say, because of the fact that it's an attitude that individuals in the system itself possess, and so it discriminates against minorities in the hiring process as well as the poverty, as well as placing them below the poverty line and causing a divergent impact on minority communities, right? And the way that you argue this is that it's existing attitudinal structures, so you can't actually fight against this. It's just going to keep things from progressing on their own. This has to be addressed by a policy because human nature is such that it's not going to fix itself naturally, or at least not fast enough to cause the harm to be reduced to the individuals affected by whatever policy you're talking about, right? It's weaker than structural inherency and gap inherency because it's an attitudinal argument. It's subjective in a lot of ways, and so the negative or the opposition can argue that, oh, the system's not racist. Oh, well, maybe individuals in the system are racist, but the system itself is not, so we can't address individuals like personally held beliefs. So why would we even try to institute a policy like that? So it allows for a lot more argumentation on the negative side, on the opposition side, because it gets into subjective determinations of attitudinal issues, right? So existential inherency is the worst and last kind. It means there's a problem, so something must be causing it. We don't know what it is, but something is causing it, and it leaves that question of what the hell it could be at stake. So, for example, the government dropping money from helicopters or using the money gun at education, right? Education rates and testing scores are down in America today, very low. And so because of this, we're going to, throw money at education. Just pump money into the system, and that's going to solve the problem without actually searching out the source or the basis of the problem itself, merely looking at there is a problem, so something's got to be causing it, and we'll just go ahead and try to make that justification for enacting the policy, right? So that's the last and worst kind of inherency. Solvency is the opposite of inherency. You're trying to prove a causal relationship but between the plan you're enacting and solving the harms you mentioned. So if you have 5 swing sets that are collapsing a year and hurting little kids, and your plan is to build new swing sets, then in that case, building new swing sets will solve that problem for the hurting of little children via the swing sets.